Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that very warm welcome. And I do want to say I don't need any sympathy for how I sound. I sound sicker than I actually am, although yesterday I wasn't sure I was going to make it because I didn't have a voice. But anyway, I am really delighted to be here. The Community Comms Collective is, I think, just an amazing initiative, and it gives people like me an opportunity to give back to organisations some of what we know. So I'm really glad that there's such a good turnout for this today. Also, I'm really passionate about this area of work because I've been at NZ On Air for 12 years, which just blows my mind. Gail and we worked together more than 12 years ago. That is a long time. So basically, my role is a really odd one. I've never actually seen one like it anywhere else. Basically, sorry, I'm fiddling around here while I'm talking because I'm just trying to make sure that my scratch pad is working. Basically, I head communications, so I do all the things that people who do communications normally do. But in addition to that, I commission research. And because NZ On Air is in the media space, the research is on the media. And so I'm going to be sharing some of those observations with you today to help you to kind of understand what you're dealing with when you're dealing with the media, because it is a very, as Elizabeth said, fast changing landscape. And yeah, I like to say my role is 50-50. It's not. It's about 80-80 or maybe 90-90. It does not add up to 100. So what I'm going to cover today is I'm going to start looking at the high level to paint a picture of the state of the New Zealand news media, because it's important to understand this, just how challenging it is and how that impacts your ability to reach your audiences. So we'll look at how to deal with the under pressure journalists. We do need to have some sympathy. We also need to understand kind of what their needs are, and also their news outlets that they're working for. And that's whether you're wanting to get your story covered or whether you're not wanting to have a story covered. That's sort of different tactics, but all the same sort of useful information. And then finally, we'll look at some other ways to get your messages out without needing to use the mainstream media. So let's start. I don't know why my what I'll cover points didn't come up. Oh dear. Anyway, I just told you. So I'm going to start by looking at some research that NZ On Air does annually or biannually, depending. At the moment, we're in a bit of a state of flux due to funding. But basically, we do this one source of truth piece of research called Where Are the Audiences? And you may have heard of it. It's often quoted in media. Media love talking about media. And it's the only place that you can get data that compares media usage across all media types. So we cover TV, radio, newspapers, online magazines, podcasts, social media, global platforms, and gaming. I'm possibly forgetting something. And what we've seen over the past 11 years has been a seismic shift. So let's jump into my time machine. And we're going to go back. Oh, there we go. There are the points. And then we're going to go back to 2014. So this was the first year we did Where Are the Audiences? So this is a study of all New Zealanders aged 15 plus and the media they used the previous day. And when we are asking about the previous day, what we're doing is we're covering a whole week so that we're not getting any skews for, whether it was a weekday or a weekend. And so what you can see here is that these were the good old days when 8 in 10 New Zealanders watched linear TV every day. So we all sat down to watch the 6 o'clock news and we stayed with it for most of the evening. 67% of us listened to live New Zealand radio. Pay TV platform, of course, is Sky, and that is a New Zealand platform. 52% of us read the newspaper every day. And as I say, those are the good old, bad old days, because you have to come halfway down this list to see an international platform, and that is YouTube/Vimeo, global platform, 30% using. And notice that right down the bottom here, 6% were using a streaming platform like Netflix, and that's because Netflix hadn't yet entered the New Zealand market, and if you wanted to access it, you had to do it via VPN. Not many people did. Not many people knew that they could. So, hold that in your head, and let's jump forward to 2024. And right at the top there, global video sharing platform, that's YouTube. 64% is the top media that New Zealanders are accessing every day. Total TV is next at 60%. Now, total TV in this survey, because we did change it, is linear and on demand. Because these days you have to consider the two joined together because it's the same content. You can just choose whether you're going to watch it live or whether you're going to watch it on demand later. So we've got a combined total there. It does make TV look a little better than what it actually is. But, you know, that's great though, because 60% is still a good figure. SVOD stands for Subscription Video On Demand, and that's your Netflixes and Amazon, etc., Hulu. And then music streaming, of course, Spotify, total radio down there at 46%. And look at newspaper, 18%. So our media habits have changed massively in the last 10 years. Now, another way you can look at this information is to consider these platforms as either local or global. And this is important for what we're talking about today, because when you look at this graph, you know, of those top 4 media that are being consumed the most every day, only one is local, and that's total TV. Whereas, if we go back again to 2014, all of the top 4 were local media sources. So that says a lot about how you can get your messages to local audiences. So they are, in here, they are basically either online video or they are newspaper. Yeah? So there are 2 different ways that you're going to consume that content. It's either going to be as video, because there's lots of video and stuff in the Herald now, or it's going to be as a newspaper. We've had to change the survey as time's gone by because things have changed. You know, you don't get one delivered at the end of the street anymore, end of your driveway.
Would newspaper be in print and digital?
Yes, yeah, if you consume newspaper content, yeah.
I'm just wondering if it changes depending on the age. I see 15 plus.
Yeah, I'm going to give you some really interesting breakdowns now, so good segue, thank you. It is hugely different depending on age. This is the 15 to 24 audience, which we call hard to reach, and they are. So the orange lines are all people 15 plus, so that was what was on the last graph. And the pink lines are 15 to 24s, and their behaviour is completely different to most of us in this room. I'm just taking a quick general survey of the age. So you can see that they are much more likely to be on global video sharing platform, YouTube, much less likely to be on local TV, much more likely to be using subscription video on demand, music streaming, Spotify, etc. Their linear TV is very low compared to the rest of the population, radio as well. And newspaper is right down here, all right? And that's quite important. And look right underneath it, that's podcast. I'm sorry, the graphics are quite blurry, aren't they? But podcast is, I think, 26%. So 15 to 24s are really big into podcast, and that's been growing every year for the last few years, which is an important thing. A few other notes on the side there, just to sort of compare other populations versus general population. So Māori New Zealanders are slightly more likely to be on global platforms than all New Zealanders. They'll listen to less New Zealand radio, they'll consume slightly more local television, especially on demand. They love podcasts and online video, and they're less likely to be reading newspapers. Pacifica are a lot more like the 15 to 24s, and same with Asian, and this comes down to what the demographic makeup is of those populations, as our Stats New Zealand representative will, I'm sure, reinforce. So here's another view of this, and this is again 15 to 24s, and this is where we get to see some social media. So this was a study we did in 2022, specifically into 15 to 24-year-olds, and we did a bit of a deep dive, and we did qualitative and quantitative research so that we could really understand a bit more about their behaviours. And social media, the daily reach, so this is 89% of 15 to 24, so using social media every day. This was in 2022, it'll be more today. We haven't updated this. Online video, so that's YouTube, etc., music streaming, subscription video on demand, online gaming. None of those are local. Go down the bottom, daily reach of our most popular local channel sites and stations. TVNZ Plus, 18% is the highest. So they are not getting local news as the sort of number one outtake of this, or local content, in any great volume. It's a real challenge. And I worry about that from a sociological point of view, both in terms of participating in democracy and in terms of social cohesion, and really understanding your place in Aotearoa as part of the world. Some of the other sort of data there sort of talks about how much time you spend consuming media, and again, the amount of time that they spend with social media, online video, music streaming, SVOD, and online gaming is really high. So this is quite stark, and it poses quite a problem if 15 to 24s happen to be part of the population that you want to talk to. So what does it all mean? So first of all, I'm going to have a quick glass of water to help my throat. So what we've got are fragmented audiences. Back in 2014, you could guarantee you were going to reach most of your audience on the TV news and through one of the main daily newspapers. Pretty easy. Now they're all over the place, and it's going to be different depending on what audience you're wanting to talk to as to where you'll find them. So it's not one size fits all. Although I do want to point out, because this is a misnomer that really, a bit of misinformation that really irks me, is the way people go, nobody's watching TV anymore. They are. Our data says they are. Over 600,000 people still sit down and watch the TV1 news at 6 o'clock. It's not quite that bad, but it is. Obviously, we're all watching in different places in different ways. And as we've seen, young people and Asian New Zealanders in particular are very hard to reach on local platforms, if at all. So it means that we've got to be thinking about other ways to communicate with them. Now, there's a financial crisis going on in the media sector, in case you hadn't noticed. The media sector do tell us about it quite regularly. And this, basically, we've seen, obviously, falling audiences due to the global platforms. Meta and YouTube are taking a huge chunk of the ad revenue, and our local platforms have therefore been thrown into an existential financial crisis. Their revenues basically fell off a cliff. Of course, we had COVID as well, which didn't help, but there was a bit of intervention there with the Public Interest Journalism Fund, which we administered. And we've all seen it, and we spoke to it a moment ago about the reports of cutbacks. We saw News Hub fold completely, and lots of local and provincial newspaper mastheads have closed, which is truly tragic. Some have pivoted to subscriptions. You may have a subscription for the New Zealand Herald now, or the Post. But of course that means that some of those stories are behind a paywall, and some of the people you might want to reach haven't got access to them. So another thing we have to think about. And of course, at NZ On Air, we've seen increasing demand for funding for different types, and particularly for journalism. We're in the middle of a funding round right now for that. And unfortunately, we're no longer fully in the game of funding journalism the way we were during COVID. So somebody's got to pay for quality journalism. And in the past, the model was ad revenue combined with what you paid to get the newspaper delivered. A lot of people have forgotten that, and are quite resistant to taking up a subscription. I reminded my 31-year-old son the other day of this when he objected to having to something being on a paywall, and I said, just take out a subscription. he said, why would I pay for it? The news should be free. And I said, well, it wasn't free when it was delivered in a newspaper on the driveway every day. We paid for that. People have forgotten that. So, yeah, the number of people paying for subscriptions is a lot less than what paid for newspapers in the past. And then we've got fewer journalists. Now, we've seen the guts ripped out of newsrooms over the recent years, and this is in the several hundreds. And I can't put an exact figure on that, but Koi2, the Centre for Informed Futures, has a report coming out in the next few weeks on the state of New Zealand journalism and the news deserts that are emerging. And basically, the numbers are quite startling. So news deserts are areas where there are communities that just don't have a local news service. And I actually just want to segue here for a moment, take a moment to sort of, and it's going to sound really, really old, but back in the late 80s when I started in journalism, I was working in radio, and I worked all around the country in different community radio stations. Back then, every little community around the country had its own radio station, its own newspaper, and it had newsrooms. And even in a small town like Masterton or Blenheim or Taupo, Timaru, all of these places, anything that happened, you had several journalists turn up because there was a local newspaper, there was a local radio station. Sometimes there were two local newspapers, no more. It just, even in, I think, 1980, 86, I worked at Radio Hauraki in Auckland. There's a rock radio station. It had a huge newsroom. Every radio station in Auckland had its own newsroom. And so anytime anything happened in Auckland, there was a whole, mass of media there to cover it. This is the stark reality we're dealing with. There aren't as many journalists now to attend events or to cover your story. And because of that, there are very few dedicated rounds journalists. I'm not sure how many of you understand what I mean when I talk about rounds, but basically, the health reporter, the science reporter, the finance reporter, the business reporter. There are still some of those in the big outlets, but there aren't as many anymore. And they are the people who are the subject matter experts that are most useful. Unfortunately, most of them are just working on the daily grind. And then the algorithms. The algorithms just rule. So whether you're clicking on a story on the Herald site or whether you're using social media to access news stories, your traffic is being tracked, and that matters. And so, and I believe it's the Herald, that feeds that information back to their journalists. So these stories got the most clicks. So what do you think they're going to do? They're going to do more of those stories, because that's how they make the pūtea. So, all worth knowing. Now, how do we work with this? Declaration. I used AI in the preparation of some of these images. I asked AI to give me a really bad Trump headline. But I actually think they're all worse, to be honest, and they're real. But anyway, that's just me. So when we're talking about communicating messages into mainstream media, we've got to find ways to work with what we have. So what's going to follow isn't a communication strategy, but some tips on how to work with media, taking into account all of those things. So acknowledging that newsrooms are busy and stretched, we've got to make it easy on them to do the story, or to cover an event or an angle or whatever it is that you're wanting from them. Hand feeding if necessary. And we've got to be flexible to their needs and aware of what's happening, which may influence the timing of your intervention into the media, whether you're doing a media release or whether you're holding an event, making some kind of announcement. And we do need to be persistent and consistent. It might not happen straight away, it might not be successful. So let's go into this in a bit more detail. So the first thing we've got to do is spend a bit of time understanding the audience, which we've just had a bit of an insight to. First thing I want to say about this is those screen grabs that I've shown you of research are available. There's a huge amount of information available to you if you go on the NZ On Air website and search under News and Research. We publish all of our research there. You can access the full reports. There are deep dives. There's data breakdowns. So if you know the audience that you want to reach, go there and find out what media they're consuming. So that's define your target audience. So whether you're talking about a long-term communication strategy for your organisation or whether this is a one-off campaign, defining your audience first off is going to help you to actually be successful. And your audience might be broad. It might be all New Zealanders, but you're not going to find them all in one place. Or it might be really specific. People who own cats in urban environments. I can't help you with that one. I don't know who owns cats in urban environments, but I believe it's quite a lot. So you're going to start, first of all, by finding out everything that you can about this audience that you want to reach. So start with where they engage with their media. Because obviously this is where they're going to be exposed to the message. I've talked, so if your audience is all New Zealanders, as I've said, you won't reach them all in one place. So you will still need to consider the different audiences within that one catch-all and where they are most consuming their different media, and then design an approach for that. For example, you may decide that you can reach a large segment of your audience by getting on the 6 o'clock news on TVNZ. As I said, 600,000 people. That's not to be sniffed at. Along with some coverage in the likes of the Herald and stuff. But how are you going to reach those 15 to 24s? I would suggest you might want to think about, obviously, social media, but also podcasts. Do you do a bit of research? Are there podcasters covering issues that are related to what you're involved with, who you might be able to engage with? Because 26% of 15 to 24s are using podcasts every day. As I mentioned, social media, will come to that a bit more later. Then what else do you know about your audience you're trying to reach, and in particular in relation to the issue that you're talking about? Is there any other research around about this? What's been covered in the news media on this topic or aligned issues recently? Do some quick desk research and distill this information, and then your audience, you've got to consider, your audience may already have seen and heard messages that might be contrary to yours, that might reinforce yours, but you need all that information to understand what you need to communicate. That's kind of a fundamental for me, is that little bit of a landscape or environment review before you sort of start. It's going to shape the views of the people you're trying to communicate with. Sorry, go on.
Just wonder, is there any platform that you wouldn't go to reach your target audience?
Oh, I could get myself into big trouble here. I think you would. The only thing for me that I really want to say to that is consider your organisation's values. There may be some platforms that don't align with your values that you want to steer clear of. For reasons of bias, for reasons of not getting a fair shot, but also for reasons that you're, it seems since COVID we're all very insular in our own pots of what we believe in. And algorithms kind of, unfortunately, don't help that, because you only get fed more of what you believe in. And so it's quite hard if you're talking to an audience that isn't actually your audience. So, yeah, if you want to talk to non-smokers, and a particular type of audience is a very much smoking audience, then you're talking to the wrong people. Yeah. So on that, make sure your message is targeted to both the audience and the medium. Was going to be my next point. So how you'll convey your message will depend on what the medium is. Obviously, what you're putting into a written media release will be different to a post on Instagram or a reel, will be different to an in-depth interview that you might give on radio, will be different to a soundbite interview that you might do for the 6 p.m. news. The message will be the same, but how it's expressed and how succinctly, in particular, is expressed is the key thing. Also, with regard to the audience, the message will change as well, depending on context, because, if, for example, you're wanting to talk about making bequests and wills to support whatever your charitable organisation is, whether they are 15 to 24 or whether they are 60 plus matters a lot, because some are a little bit closer to being able to deliver on that bequest. So how you phrase your message is going to be really important. Also ethnicity comes into that. You can be more explanatory in an interview that's not getting chopped up into 15-second sound bites. Whereas obviously you're going to be really succinct in your radio interview, that this is just going to become a little piece in the news. So those 15-second sound bites can often get an organisation into a little bit of strife because you said all of this, but only this bit got used. Where's all that context gone? We'll talk about how to deal with that. AI baby, declaration, that's all I have to do. So you need to build relationships. So newsrooms receive an avalanche of media releases every day. And to increase your chances of success, you need to have relationships with journalists to start with. And acknowledging this is quite hard to do because it's constantly changing. One day they're there, the next day they're gone, unfortunately. But just keep doing it. So, as I mentioned before, there are very few rounds people, except in those main rounds of health, education, finance, business. If you happen to be operating in an area that does align with one of those rounds, yay, find those rounds people at the major media outlets and form a relationship with them. And otherwise, again, you do some research. So you look at stories that have been in the media that are broadly in the same area that you're operating in. Who wrote them? Did they do a good job? Did they seem to get it? And then you can kind of start to form a bit of a list of journalists that you might want to engage with at different outlets. And you'll want to spread yourself around if you're trying to reach a broad audience. And then you want to reach out to them individually. Might start with an email introduction and maybe follow up with a phone call. Is there time for a coffee? And this chat that you're having is about establishing your credentials. So you want the journalist to know who you are and what you represent. If you've got a single topic or event coming up, you might sort of allude to that, might get them interested, tease them a little bit with it. Or it may be that what you're looking for is to establish a relationship where there's going to be a number of stories over time about your organisation or your cause, whatever you're doing. And so what you're really trying to do is get them interested in your organisation and get them to understand that there's a designated spokesperson there who actually has some cred and can provide some reliable commentary or perspectives. Make it easy. So a well-written media release is an invitation to do a story. It can get picked up and run almost verbatim. That's a good outcome. If it's accompanied by a photo, a really good photo, high res, or an infographic, it's a great start because those things just make it easy for the journalist to go, I can turn this around quickly. This one's out the door. You might also suggest, when you're putting out this media release, some other angles or people that the journalist might like to speak to, because you'll probably have seen that in most news stories there's usually not just one single perspective, there's usually a number, and that's the journalist's job, right? You're just helping them, you're pointing them in the right direction of other people they could talk to. And this is where the spoon feeding comes in. And I'll give you a wee example of something that happened recently at NZ On Air. So we were putting out a release and we had the luxury of a few days in advance to work with a couple of journalists to make sure that we got some coverage. And we knew who we wanted to talk to because we had a relationship with them. They'd covered other stories that related to this topic. So my colleague approached these couple of journalists and offered them an embargoed copy of the release and an infographic that we'd had prepared that just summed up all the data. And also included some suggestions of some other people other than our spokesperson quoted in the release, who might also be able to provide some comment. Now, even with 24 hours notice, head start, these journalists were unable to take up the opportunity because of their workload. One declined completely. The other, who was very, very busy but a good journalist, still wanted to do the story, but, and my colleague was determined to get the story. So she asked what else she could do, and in the end, she went and got the quotes from these other people, and she provided them to the journalist. So now he had the media release with our spokesperson's quotes, some quotes from other people, and a handy infographic, and he did a great job of the story. All he had to do was write it. So, boom. That's spoon feeding, that's getting the outcome that you want by just going the extra mile. Now, obviously, that's something that a seasoned comms person can do, but I don't think it's beyond people who are doing comms sort of alongside other work to also sort of consider doing that. Just, it's that, be helpful. What else can I do? What else would you like? And be available. It's a two-way street. They might cover your story today, and then a few weeks, they might approach you for some comment about something else that's sort of related to your field. If you can respond with authority and with useful quotes, either from yourself or your organisation spokesperson, or line them up with an interview, then that journalist just learned that you are a reliable contact. Boom. So your organisation can grow its profile this way. Also on the be available point, there's no point putting out a media release if your spokesperson isn't available that day. So many times as a journalist, I would ring up in response to a media release and find that the person wasn't available. What are you doing? So be available. So timing is everything. You might not have much control over the timing of your interaction with the media. It might just be something that's happened, or it might be something, the time's been set in stone from the beginning of time.
It's a great ChatGPT calendar.
Thursday. We do stay. Oh, ChatGPT, love it. Thank you, my proofreader in the front row. Excellent. So timing is everything. And again, it comes down to doing a bit of homework. So you've developed a relationship with particular journalists, hopefully. Find out what days of the week work for them for a story. They may say, Fridays are always dead. Always looking for copy on a Friday. Maybe they don't work Fridays, but they work Sundays instead. Having that information is really useful for you to decide sort of when you want to do your story. Do you actually need them to come to a pre-organised event? Make sure they're available if there's a particular journalist or journalists that you're wanting to get there. And also, do bear in mind deadlines. Now, media is always on today, but there are still deadlines within the always-on environment. In particular, media want fresh stories for tomorrow morning. So from a particular point in the day, they are, while they're still doing the breaking news and the updates and so forth, they are also stockpiling stories for tomorrow. They're stockpiling stories for the weekend. So understanding what those deadlines are is really important as well. In particular, things like if you're wanting that 6 o'clock news slot, you really need to know what the cut-off point is going to be for any interviews or an event that the journalist coming from one of the TV networks is aiming for, because they do have to have turnaround time. And the producer of that show or the journalist can tell you what that is. Avoid major clashes. So never put out a release in budget week, unless you're actually lobbying for money, and I would say you're a bit late. But, be aware of what's happening in the media. A major weather event, an earthquake, these things just suck all the oxygen out of the news media environment for a while, and it's best, if you can, to delay whatever you were planning to do, mindful that you might not get much in the way of pickup, unless it's relevant. If it's relevant, seize the moment. There's lots of things that make your story relevant and topical to the moment. It might be that you're in the education sector and it's school holidays. It might be that it's leading up to Christmas and you're involved in a community organisation that really struggles to support families at this time. Use whatever the topical timing is to your advantage. Also seize the opportunity when debate is raging in the media on a topic that is aligned to what you do, because this is where you can insert yourself into the fray with another perspective. And again, if you've developed that sort of profile and relationship, it's easier to do that because they know, oh yeah, Sally from that organisation is a really good spokesperson. She always says something quite wise, has a different perspective. And also seize the quiet times. I can tell you it's really, really hard to find stories in the middle of that Christmas shutdown period that are not about car crashes and weather. And so if you've got something ready-made that you can feed into that period, you're going to get some good pickup. Saturday afternoons are a bit like that as well. It's sport, or it's weather, or it's car crashes. So that might be a really good time, as long as your spokesperson is available. You also want to avoid the dead zone, which is after 4 o'clock on a Friday. That's when mainly organisations that want to bury a story put out their story. That's a good reason why Corngate came out at 4 o'clock on a Friday, if anyone can remember that. That basically is when there are fewer journalists working. So I wouldn't put anything out after 4 on a Friday. I wouldn't put anything out after about 2 on a Friday, to be honest. And the only reason that you would is you've talked to the journalist, they're working, and they're looking for stories for Saturday. So there's always an exception. Right, prepare. This is so crucial because even if you're the spokesperson for your organisation, or if your CEO, whatever is the spokesperson, and even if you are supremely confident, done Toastmasters, done lots of media, you still need to be prepared. So they're going to need information to, anticipating what the questions might be, and they need the answers. They might not have the answers. You might have to find out the answers for them. So typically, I would be preparing an official statement, and alongside that, a simple document that is basically setting out the messages and some key information that the person who's going to be speaking to media might need. It might be some data, and then for their back pocket, a list of curly questions and answers. So the curly questions are the questions you don't want to be asked, but don't put your head in the sand, they'll be asked. So be ready. The worst situation is being asked those questions and not being ready. So it can be deeply unpopular in your organisation to be the person asking that question, but you've got to kind of go, hey, listen, we've got to be prepared for this, it might be asked. Does your spokesperson need time to rehearse? Find somebody who can sit there and throw those questions at them and see how they go with answering. If you're sending out a general media release, your spokesperson needs to be available as soon as that release has gone out, and probably for another 24 hours, because that media release is an invitation to do a story. There are situations where it's not, and that's going to be in the crisis comms bit in a moment. What data have you got? So stats are great. Love stats. That's the whole reason why I'm in comms and research, because I could see that having research would give our organisation some, information to lean into and provide leadership to our sector. So someone who can reel off great stats comes across as well informed. And they can be really revealing. The whole story can be in the data. Stats lady. You might have a handy infographic. You saw one that we had prepared, which was about 15 to 24s, where we had all those icons. And that's a really powerful tool because you can get a lot of information in. And some media will actually use your infographic which is great. If it's well designed, if it's high resolution, and it covers the key points, it can actually bring that story to life, and they will reproduce it with your permission. And as I said, you have to make sure it's high res. So it needs to be done by a professional graphic designer probably. You may not have budget for that sort of thing, but there may be somebody within the community comms collective who does this sort of thing, I don't know. You might have photography or a video that supports the story. And again, this is about making it easy for the journalist to do the story. So rather than having to search a stock photo library and perhaps come up with something not very good, or a bad AI one. Yeah?
The presentation of data and information, how is that different for the different age groups? Like how are they processing that information?
Oh, that's a really good point. I mean, I think it's maybe not so much different age groups. It really comes down to visual learners versus non-visual learners, which can be sort of throughout sort of different ages. But really, the most important key with an infographic is for it to be very simple. You can't clutter it up with too many words, and you can't clutter it up with too many concepts. You kind of need to stick to main points. I think that, I mean, there's a huge range of infographics from, you know, things that are really just statistics that are visually presented, and things that are much more in the infographic style that we saw with the 15 to 24 infographics, where you've got these icons that represent something. And the skill of that really is the thing that a good graphic designer does for you. And I think that the different audiences will respond differently depending on the medium of that as well. So whether it's shared in social media, and there's some, you know, different ways to do that. But just coming back to that photography and video for a moment, providing the photo might be of yourself or your CEO, the photo might be of something relevant to the work that you do in the community, as long as all rights have been cleared. You might also get a bit whiz-bang and record a little MP4 of the person speaking. You can do that on your phone if you've got a smartphone. And so a little video to go with your story, and particularly for social media. You can see a lot of this happening now. A lot of organisations now, and particular politicians, are putting them out. Gimmicky handouts, probably not something quite so common in your sectors.
Just on the photos and things, is there, I was wondering about this, such thing as too much? Like, is it better to give just one or two really good photos,
yeah,
or give them a selection to choose from?
One. Yeah, one or two. You might find, if you are perhaps sort of working with two journalists from competing organisations at the same time, that they want different ones. It's good if you can have a couple of options, because you might be working on different angles of the same story with them. So, yeah, having some options is always good. So, sometimes we don't want to be in the media, and that's when the brown stuff's hitting the fan, and your organisation's taking a hit, or is about to take a hit, or you anticipate that it may take a hit. And I want to say here, sometimes over-anticipating the hit is a good thing. In our profession, it pays to be an overthinker. You know, if you have thought about every disaster scenario and you've prepared for it, then nothing happens. Well, that's just relief, right? It's like taking your toddler to the doctor and finding out your toddler's actually quite well. Oh, that's good. I didn't want him to be sick. You know, so sort of same. So it's all about planning. And I'm going to quote my boss here, play it with a straight bat. Honestly, I can't tell you how many times he has said play it with a straight bat. It's a joke in our organisation. It's an in-joke when he says this. But it's the best advice. How you use that straight bat will be dependent on your organisation's appetite for a wild ride in the coming days. So the first thing is to be prepared. As I said, we can't prepare for everything, but even having a high-level crisis comms plan that you can lean on in that moment when everything's going nuts is a good start. And by that, I mean it might be a simple one-pager that spells out how you'll respond in a comms crisis. Now, the comms crisis might be related to a real crisis, or it might just be something that's blowing up in the media. Some suggestions of what that high-level crisis comms plan might include. I would start with your principles. Your organisation values drive you. So what are your principles in responding? We will always respond to, according to our organisation values, we will always play with a straight bat. That's a really good place to start. It might be that one of your organisation's values is we will always, do the right thing by our people. Those things need to drive how you're going to respond. Then, if you are fortunate enough to have a dedicated comms person, or you've got a designated media contact in the organisation, or this might just simply be the CEO. The first thing you want to do is ascertain the facts. So you need to speak to the people or persons that hold that information. You're going to prepare a statement, potentially, and this might be a holding statement, it might not be the full thing. It might just be to keep the baying hounds away from the door for a moment, to simply say, we're considering X, Y, Z, and we will have a fuller statement. Give yourself a moment of breathing room. You need to inform those who need to know. So that might be staff, it might be volunteers, it might be you have a board, it might be the Minister's office. You need to let them know what's happening and how you're planning to respond. And then you prepare a detailed comms plan specific to the issue. Now, whether you've had time to prepare that detailed comms plan in advance, I would have done it in advance. My overthinking had me thinking of all the disaster scenarios, and I've already got a comms plan for each one of them. But if you're preparing it now, in the heat of the moment, it's still the same things you're going to want to consider. So you'll be thinking about what the messages are and what channels you will use to get them out. So do you have some trusted relationships with some journalists that you can activate? Now, I'm not suggesting that they're going to give you an easy ride. I'm just saying that relationship will really help. It's someone that you can reach out to and you can go, hey, this is happening and we've got a statement. You might just get a better outcome than going out cold. Do you have champions who will line up in support of you? Ideally, you've already lined them up, or you know who they are and they're quite easy to get in touch with. Sometimes you don't need to line them up. Sometimes you just let it roll and your champions come to the fore. But it's worth knowing who they are and making sure that they understand. If you want to get in touch with them, they understand what you're doing. So in my job, I've dealt with quite a few of these reputational challenges, comms crises, and some I was prepared for and some I wasn't. Great surprise. This is what you're doing today, Allanah. You're not doing what you thought you were doing, you're dealing with this. But every time you always start with, what do I know? Do I have all the facts? So speak to the relevant people internally. It's really important that no information's being withheld from you, no surprises. Really, really hard to deal with the situation if you don't have all of the facts. If there are stories already in the media on the issue, who's saying what? Where are your critics or potential critics, and what are they saying? And it can be hard hearing that. Like, it can be really, really confronting when your organisation's taking a hit and people are saying mean things. And you've got to try to keep emotion out of it. Straight bat. Stick to the facts. That's why you've got the facts. So in this scenario, I'm just going to paint two ends of a spectrum. There's a lot in between, but we don't have hours for this. So your response might range in this crisis environment from a complete mea culpa to a total lockdown. And I'm just going to describe kind of what those might look like. So complete mea culpa. You know your organisation's stuffed up and you prepare a fulsome media statement, accepting responsibility, explaining what went wrong, providing all the context, how it might be remedied. You don't know how it might be remedied yet? Say that. We'll be doing a thorough audit and investigation to find out how this occurred and we'll make public the findings and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Really good organisations front into that and say we don't know the answers yet, but we will find out the answers and we'll tell you. context is really important, and context gets missed a lot in the rush of the journalists to get the story. And so providing that context can often be, really crucial to changing the way that this is playing out for you. And then you prepare your spokesperson. Though you do those curly questions, the ones nobody wants asked, and you rehearse some simple answers. You brief any relevant staff, board, stakeholders of what's occurred, and that the attached statement will be issued at a certain time. Make sure everybody's fully in the picture, and you front up as much as you need to until the story's run out of steam. Now that's textbook. You've done Comms 101, you know how to handle a crisis sort of scenario. Let's consider the total lockdown scenario at the other end. So this is one that you may need to use because there really is no positive way out of this situation, and perhaps your leadership doesn't feel able to front up for legal reasons, and the safest course of action is to say nothing or very little. So you need to understand you don't have to speak to media. You can put the phones on silent, and I highly recommend that you do, and that you screen calls. So you listen to the message, or it might be followed up with a text or an email, and you gather information. So you understand what the questions are, where they're coming from, and breathe. Has she got the right amount of fingers? It's an AI photo. So really important, take some time, turn the phones off and get that information together first. Is there anything to be gained by engaging in this situation? By engaging, are we going to be fanning the flames, giving more oxygen to the story? Say you've decided you're going to. So you're going to prepare your statement, and it might simply be a polite but firm response to emails and texts to say we have no comment at this time. Now, even as a former journalist, I don't do that on the phone. It's so easy to inadvertently make a comment even when you intended to make no comment. An email or text is so much easier. You want to make sure all your staff or volunteers that might be contacted directly know what's happening and the plan. They probably also want to turn off their phones if their phone numbers are able to be found, and they may also want to screen their calls for a while just to make sure they're not having to deal with questions that they can't answer or shouldn't answer. Then you stick to your plan. It's possible it'll all blow over, but it could take days. Yeah.
Isn't complete lockdown is kind of like admission? No, complete
Or
lockdown
the way it could seem?
No, I think sometimes you can just leave a story to play out without you being part of it. And your organisation might be mentioned, but you haven't provided them with any fodder to add into that story. It's really very situational dependent, and it can pose huge risk, but sometimes the risk of engaging is greater, and in particular in legal situations. So, an example I can give was being on a board of trustees of a school a number of years ago, and one of our staff was arrested for interfering with children at the school. In that situation, there was absolutely nothing the school could or should say in the short term to media about that, because there was obviously a legal process that needed to happen. That person's children also attended the school. It was a very ick situation, and we just felt that there was nothing that we could do or say at that point in time safely while the police investigation and the court process was going on. There are situations where it's best to say nothing at all. A couple of other things while this stuff is playing out that you want to consider would be, in fact, the main thing I would advise is if you have social media channels, turn off comments, because people will go looking for you. They'll hunt you down on social media, and they will bring their hate or their negativity or their bad comments to that place, and it might have nothing to do with it. So you want to protect. You might even cancel some planned media engagements if that's, something that's on the horizon, and today's not a good day to be doing this, because of course, and you see it all the time. Minister fronts up for an interview on Morning Report on this subject, and then while you're here, we're going to ask you about that thing that happened 2 days ago that you didn't front for. So you've got to be cognizant that can happen. So then we come to social media, and social media, love it or hate it, can be useful for reaching your audience. And this might be in addition to what you're doing in mainstream media or instead. And you can see that people circumvent the mainstream media all the time with social media these days. Trump invented his own social media platform. That's a good way to do it. So when and how you might use social media for your comms messaging. I'm going to assume that your organisation already has a social media presence. And by presence, I mean you've got a profile on social media channels, you've got followers, and you post with some regularity. So that's a presence, basically. People are engaged with you. Earlier, I showed you data that demonstrates that young New Zealanders, 15 to 24s, and in fact it stretches all the way up to 39s and later data, are more engaged with social media than they are with local mainstream media. So if that's your audience, or a key part of your audience, then a social media-led strategy needs to be core to your comms strategy. Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat primarily, and even good old Facebook. The kids say they don't use Facebook, but the research says they do. It's like the people who say, I never watch television, but then you mention a particular program, they go, oh, I hated it. Must have watched it.
Is that because their parents are on Facebook?
It could be that they're using Messenger and that they're seeing the odd post, yeah. We actually did go into that in more detail in the youth research, so there was some data on that. So you might use social media to amplify the messages that you're already getting out through mainstream media. A simple way to do that is to share the media release on social media platforms. And this is a good way that it can become interactive, because then you're going to get people commenting and you can answer the questions. Hopefully it's good stuff, not bad stuff. And it generally just reaches more people that way. If you've got a little bit of putia that you can put towards boosting a campaign, you can actually target an audience if you're using Meta in particular, and that can be helpful because you know that you want to reach people of a particular age or in a particular area or with particular interests. You might use social media instead of mainstream media, simply to get your message out without it going through the filter of a journalist's eyes. Maybe you weren't successful in getting a journalist to cover it. Or maybe you just want the full story with the context told, and it's been lost somewhere in translation. So you might also use social media to make the message more personal. So you might have shot a video with the CEO and share that, so the CEO is delivering that message personally on a social media platform. You might also have shot some video with some key stakeholders reinforcing your message, and again, great place to share is on social media. You might go to social media to address online comments that are swirling around the issue and there's misinformation, and it's all getting a little bit out of control. And caution here, it can get messy really fast. So I guess the final note on that, and we're going to, this is a bit more detail, but the final note on using social media in this way is that mainstream media are watching social media, so it can all come back again, right? So you often see social media being quoted in mainstream media. If you're going there to reach your audience directly, great, but it can also end up as a news story. Now, for your social media posts, and I'm talking here specifically those that are carrying an important comms message, as opposed to the fluff, the fun stuff, the TikTok of your CEO dancing with elves at Christmas. This is the important stuff. So the basic rule is to keep it succinct. If you want to provide more information, you can link to some information somewhere online. It might be on your own website, it might be on somebody else's, and include an image. Now, the post that I put up there is one of ours from a couple of days ago about a screen legend, John Barnett, who sadly passed away. The statement's really succinct. We've linked to his profile on NZ On Screen because there's a lot more information there about him. I think I took that screenshot quite quickly after it had been shared, so it's got a lot more views since then. Now, that might have been done differently. We could have actually had a video of our CEO giving this mihi, which would have been more personal, but we didn't have time to do that. And another way we might have done it is we might have created a carousel of if you think of them, it's like a card with words and maybe an image on, and so there might have been 4 or 5 of those carrying that message, so you're clicking through from each one to the next to get the full message. So there's a number of different ways you could get a message like that across. Now, it's in the comments section that things can get really nasty, and so a few basic rules of thumb. Watch for a bit. So, like with so much of the advice I've given today, it is kind of like breathe, take a moment, see what's happening. Watch for a bit. If people are taking shots, watch and see if your supporters are going to come in and fire back, because it can actually self-moderate, and you don't even need to do anything, which is, I hope it happens for you.
Sorry, just a question about this. We tried to turn comments off, but the person who is helping with this said, no, we can't turn comments off on the business page. Have you managed to?
Yes. Yes. I'm not sure why you couldn't. Yeah, but you can. The other thing you can do is you can hide the comments, and so only the person who made the comment can see it.
But by then it can be quite late.
That's right, and I mean, the main thing is you want to be doing something reasonably quickly, so you've waited to see if things are going to self-moderate. There are some situations where I wouldn't be waiting, and this is my personal bottom line. So racism, abuse, swearing, although I've personally got a very high tolerance level on social media, tolerance level's reasonably low, and spam, and any of those things, hide the comment or block the user if it's really nasty, and report them. Anything that is a threat should be blocked and reported. It shocks me the way some people behave on social media. It's really awful, and it's no wonder that some people are being harmed by this. So the thing you've got to remember is it's your organisation's responsibility to keep people safe on your social media channel. It's not Facebook's responsibility. Yes, there are community standards, but it is your responsibility to your stakeholders.
Just on that point, something you can do in the back end to help yourself hide stuff is load the back end with keywords you don't want.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's called profanity filter.
Yeah. And in fact, I haven't turned that on.
I should hide it.
They capture it before you do it.
Yeah. So it might be that you can identify those words, but it might be more the tenor and the things that people are saying, It might be personal attacks on staff or people involved with your organisation. It might be complete misinformation. So you can't really anticipate what these things are going to be, but you've got to be onto it.
Looking after your community as well, you can have comments on, but limited to only people who have followed your page for more than 24 hours, and so that often keeps the people who are interacting with your view, but still being able to do that, but trolls not being able to.
Yeah. And trolls are everywhere, but they are more prevalent on some platforms than others. We recently took ourselves off X, formerly known as Twitter, as did a lot of people, because it was just out of control. There was nothing positive happening there. So if it's all getting out of control, hopefully you can turn off the comments. Be mindful of your own, whoever is the person who is manning social media, whether it's yourself or somebody else. This is harmful to our own mental health, and so we have to sort of take the right actions to protect ourselves. We need to be able to step away. We need to be able to not have to see it and not have to look at it over the weekend or overnight or something like that. And that's when you really do need to turn off the comments so that nothing more can happen and nobody else needs to be looking at it.
Is there any platform with more toxic comments than others, like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and
Twitter, X, yeah, X. But I mean, like Reddit, I mean, gosh, or any of these platforms can get really out of control quite quickly, and it depends on the, on the group of followers. I recently had to look into what was happening on a particular heavy metal band's Facebook profile. I have all the fun jobs, and whether it was Facebook or Instagram, might have been Instagram. Boy, there was some stuff happening there that, wow, I would not want to see happening on any of my channels. But the tolerance level was obviously higher because of the kind of genre and the kind of people that we're following. Now, that's kind of a wrap up, but I want to kind of wrap up by just reiterating a few of those important points. So, as you've seen, media's not one size fits all. You need to do your homework a bit. I want to see lots of hits on the NZ On Air website and the research section happening as a result of this. So we've got deep dive research in 2022 into youth. We've got deep dive research last year into Māori audiences. We've got our general Where Are the Audiences survey, which has been running since 2014. And there are various ways to get into that data in different ways. And at the moment, we're doing children's media use, and that'll come out later in the year. And that is children aged 2 to 14, 2 to 15. So there's always something new coming out in that space, and it's really worth understanding your audience through that lens. So do your homework about the media that you may be interacting with and the journalists that you potentially can identify and build some relationships with. And that's going to be an ongoing thing because, as we've seen, they're moving along, they're moving to a different outlet, or they're unfortunately leaving the sector because the jobs are disappearing. But you just have to keep that momentum going in those relationships. You're going to be prepared, high-level crisis plan at the very least, and potentially also a situational comms crisis plan for a particular thing. But even just, getting into that strategy area, hopefully with the help of someone from the Community Comms Collective, that can sort of steer you through having a plan that speaks to your organisation's values and how you're going to respond either positively or in a crisis situation. Ask for expert help if you need it. There's one more point I want to close on and take some more questions. And it is this. Support local media. We need them. Without them, democracy fails. Without them, social cohesion suffers. Without them, our kids don't know who they are in this universe. And we're really facing an existential crisis, and we need local people to value local media because we in this room need to reach them through those local media. That's the best way for us to get them. So if you do one thing today, take out a subscription or, or go home and watch the TV news tonight because the advertisers there are there to reach you. And we're kind of all in this. So that is my plea.